The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
So JT Miller and Elias Pettersson don't like each other. It's not really news because I feel as if this is something that has been known before this season. Or I shouldn't say don't like each other, but like they're not the best of friends. But it turned into basically the story of the weekend with how the Canucks addressed it and Elias Pettersson's reaction to being asked about it after they played the Senators on the weekend. CJ, what do you think of how this story has spiraled? We've already touched on the fact that we know they're not the best of friends, but what do you think of how this story is being discussed?
Well, I'm not even sure what the story is. You know, that's kind of where I get a bit confused. I mean, the premise or the underlying thought that they aren't best of friends certainly is not new. It's obviously been acknowledged essentially with Rick Tocchet and Quinn Hughes' comments in recent days, but I think even prior to that. But I don't know what the story is. Like, I haven't seen anyone say these guys got in a fist fight in the dressing room or that these guys have said, I can't play on this team if you're on this team. And so I don't really know what the story is beyond sort of restating the fact that, hey, here are two colleagues, two important parts of the Vancouver Canucks that maybe don't see the world in the same way. I mean, we've seen with this team that they can win with both those guys, even with that being part of the dynamic that exists between them and more broadly in the dressing room for the team. And so I guess I'm sitting over here scratching my head a little bit as it goes on days and days and days. And then, you know, you've got Pettersson saying people are making shit up. JT Miller was even more direct than that. You know, it's just one of these strange situations where I guess everyone's kind of winking, hey, here there's a story, but I don't know what the frickin' story is. I mean, Vancouver hasn't won enough games lately. Obviously, both those players as individuals have not impacted the Canucks the way you'd like to see by driving play or putting up points, putting up goals. And so I suppose that's the environment that a story like this finds more life than maybe it needs. But this truly is like, I feel like I'm in the strangest timeline. I'm not sure what we're supposed to be talking about.
Well, I'm glad that you said what you said. I think that's important because my understanding is that it's just a personality clash. And the fact that there doesn't seem to be any like rumor that there was an actual fist fight or anything beyond that tells me, okay, well, maybe this really just is some kind of personality clash. But also people are making the connection that we know JT Miller was away from the team for some time and Elias Pettersson was able to play without him. And now that JT Miller's back, Elias Pettersson suddenly can't play. He's pointless in his last 6 games. Like, to your point about how
I guess that's the story then, right? Is that
yeah.
Basically what it boils down to? Is that when they're both playing together, they can't play?
It seems recently that's kind of what it's become, I guess.
But I feel like that ignores years of other evidence, right? Like,
I agree with that too.
Like, that's like, I understand in this moment, you're looking for answers if you're around a team that all of a sudden, you know, has kind of hit the skids and, you know, these players that are 100-point guys at their best in the past aren't performing that way. So you're looking for an explanation. But I mean, to value the last 6 games over the previous 200 seems to lack a little bit of logic to me. And, you know, again, this is just one of those stories that does seem to have so much life. Like, I can't deny it might not grow into something bigger that, you know, there might be a time where the organization has to decide, you know, obviously the Canucks' first, second, and third preference is to keep playing with 2 of their best players and to find a way to make it work. But I suppose there is a world if it doesn't, you know, if this does actually take on an even greater life that there's this feeling they can't play together. But I mean, I just don't think that we have enough evidence that suggests that, you know, and I suppose maybe that's what's significant about both Pettersson and Miller in recent days coming out and kind of decrying this whole notion is that, you know, it does seem as though they're committed to making it work. I mean, they both signed long-term contracts also in recent memory. That's it. That's another part here. I mean, had either JT Miller or Elias Pettersson wanted to pursue free agency or get a way out of Vancouver, they both had an escape hatch in recent years and instead sign, 7 and 8 year contracts, long term, basically career long type of extensions. So, yeah, keep coming back to the start and just going like, WTF, Julian, but maybe I'm missing the forest for the trees myself.
I mean, I would think, to your point about years of evidence, it's one thing to just not get along. If it's at a point where there's something kind of heightened in all of this, like something must have happened and we just don't know. I mean, I thought it was very...
there's evidence of that.
You're right. There's no visible evidence of that. It's just like Quinn Hughes addressing it. Rick Tocchet literally, like I was in the Rick Tocchet scrum over the weekend, and he literally looked at us and he was like, "Why didn't you guys ask for Elias Pettersson and JT Miller today?" Like, it was very like meta. It's like, oh, you're right, yeah, like that is something that people
that's
could
him
do.
saying, "Why are you asking me?" Like, ask the people that you think have an issue for
sure. But like, just the idea,
which again,
that, like,
these guys are adults. I think that was a good call from Tocchet. Like, I don't know why weren't they asked? I mean, they eventually were asked about it and they both denied it.
For sure. I guess it's just like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it just felt like the idea that those two didn't get along was more of an open secret than anything else. And now it's turned into a discussion topic that's become fair game. I think that's what I find really interesting in all of this. For
sure. I mean, there's no doubt that it isn't. Look, like, the thing is no one is saying, actually, these guys are really close and everyone's just missed something like that. Yeah. That part is that much. I'm comfortable. We are standing in the truth in that these are two very different personalities, different backgrounds, different ways of being, different ways of seeing the world. In JT Miller's case in particular is quite an abrasive personality, demands a lot of the people around him. I mean, these aren't on the surface. These aren't bad qualities. They're just facts, right? And I think, the one thing that we can't appreciate if you haven't been in that kind of environment is there's like, you're together all the time. You travel together, you live together, you're playing together, you're in high sort of pressure and emotion moments together, be it on the bench, in the dressing room. I mean, it's sort of like the extreme. It's like having 20 or 25 brothers and you all kind of like for 6 to 8 months a year, just with each other all the time. Probably a sibling is the best, analogy you can draw to what it's like growing up, say maybe not in the biggest house and you're just around your siblings all the time and you don't get a choice and you go on road trips together, you go to the grocery store with your parents together. And like, sometimes you might not always get along, even if you love your brother. Right. And I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn there to a sports team. It only stands to reason that certain individuals get on each other's nerves, might even have a FU, which is again totally acceptable in their workplace, not always in everyone else's. But it doesn't mean you can't also then be, playing on Tuesday night against a big team and you're part of the same fight trying to win a game. So I don't know where this goes next. It really is. It's a strange story though. It's like a smell in a room that won't disperse, won't dissipate. It's just like everyone is kind of aware of it. I don't know what it means yet. And certainly at some point in time, I suppose if there becomes true evidence that these guys can't play together, I mean, it's a different discussion. I think maybe that's why it's hanging around as a story, is that no one wants to jump to the next conclusion, but the next conclusion is, can they still play together? Or does the Vancouver Canucks have to consider trading one of their two best players because for harmonious reasons? I don't think they're there yet in terms of even having to contemplate that per se. But I guess maybe that's why it's such a story, is because people are kind of inching closer to getting to that part of the conversation, but just hasn't really, there's not enough really leg to stand on for that just yet.
I'm glad we have a workplace where we don't say FUs to each other, by the way. I just want that said. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying in the course of, you see the way players interact on the bench, the way coaches, it's a different workplace than most others. It's no way around it. Same way, you watch a football game. Yeah. Sometimes there's guys just outright arguing with their teammates on the sidelines.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes.
Yeah. Could you, thank God we don't have to imagine, if we were just arguing with each other, on a podcast, which we do have the platform to do it, but I'm glad we don't go there. Disagreements are fine, but we don't have to berate each other.
Exactly. We can coexist. We have years of proof of that too. So
Yes, we do.
We don't have to have the same food takes, but we can still get along and pull in the same direction, trying to make the best podcast possible.
Exactly. Is this going to continue to be a story if the Canucks keep losing? Probably. But we're just as confused as everyone else is on that story. But being in that market, like just being in Vancouver, by the way, that was the first time I'd ever been in Vancouver over the weekend following the Senators road trip. Like, wow, what an atmosphere. And obviously the passion is there. So no wonder a story like this would take so much fire and have so much oxygen, I should say, just because of how passionate that fan base is and just how wild that media market is. And I don't say that in a negative way, just like the pressure and the coverage of that team, just very different from a lot of different markets across the country.
And a distinct vibe in Vancouver. I think anyone who's sort of traveled the country, it's a different kind of feel in that city, which is actually great. Variety is the spice of life, right? I mean, this is it. I told you, I think that's what was always my favorite trip when I covered the Leafs, is going through the western part of the country, just because the games are always great. I love the cities. I got friends in each of those places. I mean, that's cool. You got to go there, but yeah, Vancouver, it's very much its own island. Mm-hmm. A lot of conspiracies, start and end in that marketplace. Like, it's always been the way. I mean, way back when, Tony Gallagher is a writer who's, was honored in the Hockey Hall of Fame, was kind of famous for always having his tinfoil hat on about certain things around the league. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a market. I mean, Jason Botchford, to, very distinct voices grow out of that media market. Very smart people but not afraid to stand on the unconventional side of an issue and argue a certain point.
For sure. Let's move on from Vancouver and talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, specifically Auston Matthews. He doesn't play against the New York Islanders over the weekend, re-aggravating his upper body injury. What do we know about that situation? Yeah,
I mean, it's been difficult because it's the same injury that goes back to training camp for Auston. And he really just hasn't had he's been pretty good, actually, given what he's been nursing an injury essentially all season long, and then dealt with, a couple of weeks where he wasn't unable to play in November. But, we're recording this Monday morning. He's not going to play this afternoon against the Winnipeg Jets either. So he's going to miss the Leafs' last two games leading into the holiday break. And, the good news here is it's not as though surgery's on the table. There's no expected 7-8 hour flights anywhere to get treatment. My sense around the situation is there's not necessarily a ton of panic yet or anything like that. It sounds like rather than a structural issue, he's dealing with something more, in the way his body has to move. I think just needs a little bit of treatment essentially to get there. And, the Leafs play back to back coming out of the Christmas break. So, it wouldn't surprise me if this extends to maybe even missing those games, because, by taking those games off, you're looking at 9-10 days since his last game. And that can be pretty valuable to gain that time. But, it just feels like one of these stories where you hope for Austin's sake, it will go away and that he'll just be playing. But, unfortunately, it's a significant enough injury that he's clearly had to manage it for months already. And, got to a point, played a very tough game in Buffalo, took a big hit from Tage Thompson that game, took a cross check at the side of the net when he was, around the goalie there and just wasn't able to keep playing. So, it's always high alert when it's Auston Matthews. I think the Leafs will trade this time off if they get some version of him that's bigger and better in the games that still matter. And to the Leafs' credit too, they've won a lot without him in the lineup. But no one's totally hitting the panic button here yet. But it's hard to spin it as a positive either when they just had to play so many games without their captain this season, and there's still a little bit of uncertainty about when he's going to play again.
He's your best player. If he's not available to you, there's always concern. But you also bring up a great point too. Yes, the fact that the Leafs have won games without him, there is reason to not hit the panic button. As long as he's healthy. This wasn't going to be a
season that was about another 60 or 70 goal chase. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I guess if it happened, obviously they would take it, and I'm sure the fans would would enjoy watching him score that frequently. But I feel like this season, I mean, the Leafs, I'm not saying in the past they haven't had their eyes on the right things, because that would be unfair too. But I think it's very, 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 very apparent what success will be measured by in Toronto this year or not. And, I think it's pretty clear too at this stage of Auston Matthews' career, same with Mitch Marner, all these guys, William Nylander, they want to push what they can do, because that can be good for the team, but really it's all about the team success. And so, in that sense, I do think that it's easier to maybe get through the period off in November, a little bit of time now around Christmas, with the idea that it's for the greater good. It's just, with a body, I mean, I think sometimes we forget this. I mean, these are human beings, essential to all of their performance is some degree of health, because the reason they can do things on the ice that most of us can't, and the reason you pay a lot of money to go watch them play, is because they're spectacular in what they do. But if your body isn't performing the way you're used to, I mean, you're just not going to be as effective as you were. It's kind of, I think sometimes we lose sight of that, though. It's like, you don't just plug him in at night for an hour and then hope that he's going to be better the next day. I mean, there's real healing that has to happen. Obviously, a lot of treatment that Austin's receiving. As I say, I get the sense that he actually feels really good, that he has a sense of exactly what he's dealing with. There's no question, like, is it this? Yes, but is it this? Like, I think they have a really good handle on what the injury is. I think they have a treatment plan that both the team and the player are very comfortable with. And it's almost just a matter, it's like adding WD-40 to a creaky, area. You almost just needs a little bit more lubricant there, or something, for better lack of better terms. But I think that he just needs to get his body flowing a little bit better, but it's not as though there's a structural issue. So, tough for him to miss the games right before Christmas. I think he had his family in town for that time. But as I say, I think the Leafs will gladly trade these games, however many they end up being, if they get a feeling that they can get him healthy come playoff time.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Shopify. When you think of cool brands like Aloe, Skims, and Allbirds that are selling like crazy, you think about the product, you think about the brand, you think about the marketing. But you don't really think about the business behind the business. Usually it makes selling so much simpler. And oftentimes you're probably coming across a brand that uses Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's home of the #1 checkout on planet Earth, and the not so secret, Shop Pay. It boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going ka-ching. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are at, whether they're scrolling or they're strolling on the web, in your store, in your feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Aloe, Skims, and Allbirds use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Johnston. All lowercase, shopify.com/Johnston. Okay. Should we get to Matt Rempe and his 8-game suspension after a pretty dangerous hit on Miro Heiskanen of the Dallas Stars the other night? You're a pretty unusual suspension, for Matt Rempe, who is a repeat offender in this league.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't even played 40 games if you add up, between the regular season and the postseason experience he has. He's been ejected from 4 games. He's now been suspended for a total of 12. When you couple that with a 4-game suspension, he got in the playoffs. I think he's now, someone did the math on Twitter. I think he's now forfeited something like 15% of his career earnings through what he's had to pay, as a result of the suspensions, $80,000, salary forfeiture for this 8-game suspension. So maybe the Christmas gifts for his loved ones won't be quite as good as they might have been. Come the holidays here, because that's tough. And really, I think you're now talking about a player, even as young as Matt Rempe is, where you just wonder what kind of career can he have? Can he find a way to play within the rules? Obviously, what makes him different than a lot of others is his sheer size. I don't think it's a mystery to say that, what's going to keep him in the league is he's going to have to be a physical player. He's going to have to fight from now and again. I think that's pretty evident. We're not talking about him developing into a 25 goal scorer. But he's got to give his coaching staff and any management that employs him confidence he can do it within the rules. And, what really strikes out to me about the Heiskanen hit in particular, so many times that you and I end up, Julian, debating a suspension, the plays are really fast. And we could debate, like, was he thinking this? But you don't really know. In this case, he has quite a bit of time relative to NHL hockey where he's coming across the ice, where he's clearly looking at Heiskanen's number 4 on his sweater, where he still elects to hit him from behind and also elevates up with his elbow and delivers an elbow to the head. I mean, it truly, I can't imagine if there's any controversy here, it might be because someone said 8 games isn't enough. But I mean, I think this was the easiest stiff punishment suspension the league could have, both because of his history and just, it's such an egregious play. It's you have boarding / hitting from behind and you have elbowing. Like, it's 2 clear violations of rules that can't be violated. And so part of me goes, what is he thinking? Other than, I do understand he's under pressure to try to make a physical impact in the game, but that hit isn't even close on any level. I think of like the Ryan Reeves, Darnell Nurse, that was 5 games, but I actually don't think that hit was that far off of being legal. I'm not defending it by any means, but I just mean that's a quick one there. And, Reeves mistimes the hit and it's got devastating consequences. He gets a 5-game suspension. This was not that. Like, this is a bad decision, not nearly at the kind of speed that a lot of these hits that tend to go awry are. And, Matt Rempe's going to pay dearly for it. I mean, I don't know if we'll see him back in the league this year, quite honestly. I'm not sure what his future is because Nana's always been playing a lot anyway for the Rangers.
Yeah, like, with Matt Rempe as a guy, like, if his ability is just to fight people and make dangerous hits, there's no value, at least for me, for him having a long-term NHL future. Like, it's not as if this guy has shown that maybe he could work as a bottom 6 guy who can get you even 10 goals a year and just play physical enough to keep himself there. Every time we talk about this guy, he's hitting somebody dangerously. He's pounding the crap out of somebody in a fight, which if you invest in that, sure, but we live in a world where you have to be able to do that and provide some kind of offensive production, or at least be solid defensively. And I have not seen enough evidence, that word's been thrown around a lot today. I have not seen enough evidence to suggest that he's able to do those last 2 things I said.
No, I'm with you. And the one, I guess, if there's a small counterpoint, is he's still a pretty young player. And there is time for him to develop other skills, to find ways to, stay in a lineup. I don't know what that looks like right now. And, when you have this kind of a suspension, I mean, that's 8 games is pretty significant. You're obviously well on the radar. I mean, when he ever gets back out there, whether it's at the American Hockey League level or if he gets back to the NHL at some point, he's got to be very careful about how he does his job, and that'll be its own that'll be its own thing. I mean, you don't want to be thinking too much as a player. You usually want to be reacting. But he's under a pretty big spotlight, and yeah, I mean that it just wasn't even close, that hit. It was so bad. Like, that's probably why I was trying to think, like, when it's been a long time since we've seen, like, the last longer suspensions have been guys who've repeatedly crossed the line. Tom Wilson at times has dealt with that. He largely seems to have escaped that sort of cycle that he was on for a while there, where he was getting suspended with a lot of frequency. But we just don't see a lot of this, frankly. And that's why I think Rempe's got to be forced to adapt or die really quickly, because I think it's going to be, I don't think there's going to be any grace for anything from him, nor should there be moving forward. And comes at a bad time. I mean, the Rangers are obviously putting him in the lineup looking for some energy. This is a team still looking to get out of its doldrums, and didn't have this in mind for the outcome in terms of what that looked like.
I think that's basically it for our last episode before Christmas. We kept it pretty short today.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anyone to trade during the holiday roster freeze.
I'm sure enough people are asking that in the comments of the YouTube video. Can you trade this player? Someone reached out to me over the weekend and said, can you make sure that my team has some moves they can make? And I was like, well, it's one thing when people ask, like, hey, is this team going to trade this player? It's a whole other thing when you get asked, can you make my team trade this person? Like or trade somebody. Like,
well, I don't know.
I don't know.
Look for those that like the trades. I mean, this has been a pretty busy start to the NHL season. I think there's lots of evidence to suggest we're going to pick right up where we left off as we get into, the freeze lifts at the end of December here. We get into January. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see more moves. There's a lot of teams in some amount of duress. Again, it's already just kind of a trading environment. Like sometimes it feels like once trades start and there's just more conversations happening, it's almost like they lead to more trades somehow. It's like almost like everyone's just like, F it. Like we gotta make things happen here. So I think there's going to be lots of action. We're still 10 weeks in a little bit from the trade deadline, which that'll pass pretty quickly. I mean, 10 weeks it's a long time, but it's not really that long. And obviously some of that is eaten up too by the Four Nations face-off tournament in February, where not a lot will be going on in the NHL. There might be lots of discussions between GMs during that little break from February 12th to 20th. But yeah, I think if you're worried about your team, don't worry. There's lots of time yet to make moves, and there's something in the air this year, I think, with the rising cap. And again, just a lot of places where either the teams have massively underachieved or they're just mounting pressure to take a step forward. So I don't know which fan base was asking you personally, Julian, for you to go like knock on their GM's door, but I still think we're going to have quite a busy second half off the ice, once we get going here on the other side of Christmas.
I'll just say the franchise is a little bit more on the bottom end of things.
Well, that's not narrowing it. I mean, that's half the league. by definition.
By definition, yes. They're in a particular cluster that gets talked about a lot. That's I think maybe that makes it a little bit better, but that's fair too. A lot of teams could be in that as well. How
about your Sens, by the way? What a trip. I know it didn't end maybe on the highest mark here, and Allmark's injured, so we'll have to see where that goes. But
oh yeah, that's it's apparently his back tightened up on Sunday against the Edmonton Oilers, and then they pulled him. But hey, they won six straight before that loss against Edmonton, which they had they hadn't done since 2017. Like, did they turn a corner? I think they turned a corner. I think they did.
Well, yeah, but I mean, a lot of it is, but what's going to happen with Allmark? Like, how long is because he was such, I mean, you can't, I'm trying to think, you can't separate the performance with his performance, right? Like that run was not largely due to him, but he had a huge hand in it.
Absolutely, he did. Like, him being just super cool, making these saves and not being a worry. Like, the Senators thrived off that. Like, being at these games where they're marveling at his performances, like, they all couldn't believe what they were seeing. And, well, look, you have to hope for the Senators. He's not out long, but yeah, he's a big reason why they were able to turn their season around. It looked pretty bad in November, and then now in late December, they're in a playoff spot. I mean, where people are wondering if the Battle of Ontario could happen. Here's another thing that I think would be really fun too. If it gets to that point, there's no Battle of Ontario. Say like the Leafs finish second in their division, it'll be Leafs Bruins again. How fun would Florida Ottawa first round would be? That would be really fun. That would
be good.
You get the Tkachuk brothers against each other.
Travel wouldn't be great, but I would take I would take the storylines.
Tkachuk brothers going up against each other in the playoffs. Sign me up for that. It's not the same level as Toronto versus Ottawa, but Tkachuk versus Tkachuk in the first round. I'm there. I have to be there.
Yeah, I'm sure the face-off crew would enjoy that too. Now that they got Brady Tkachuk under the spotlight, they wouldn't mind seeing that sort of matchup come together. Don't sleep on the hockey club either. Utah HC had a really nice finish. Lost the game Sunday night, but still they're right up there in playoff positioning, or at least knocking on the door. And so I'm pumped for when we get to the other side of the holidays and the season gets going, because just feels like this year we might actually have some real turnover in terms of what teams make the playoffs, and a few that we probably thought for sure would make it that may not get in there. I mean, this is setting up as a pretty compelling second half to me.
Especially if a lot of that turns into really good divisional races too, like the Pacific right now. I mean, you got Vegas up top, but Edmonton and LA also fighting each other on points. Like, it's very intriguing stuff in that division. And Winnipeg, can they go wire to wire? I mean, they've been really good all year too. I'm looking forward to the second half of the season. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too, buddy. But enjoy some family time in the meantime.
You too, my man. You too. Enjoy your Christmas. Yeah, man, for sure. For everyone who sent in questions for Ask CJ, in the coming days, we are going to do a whole Ask CJ episode. So be on the lookout for your question to be answered in that episode. In the meantime, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, best of the season to you. Thank you so much for listening, watching the CJ Show, 300 episodes strong, and let's hope for 300 more. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys.
Ho, ho, ho.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.